Hey there, it's me, Eden. If you are new to the channel, then please subscribe to my channel and visit my Patreon page for early access. Link in the comment, thanks. We walked over to the far wall, where the tops were hanging. Nikki soon found the one she was looking for, and began to riffle through the selection to see what sizes they might have. I noticed an assistant coming over to us, and looked rigidly at the tops in front of me. It even occurred to me to pick one up and look at it, to avoid undue suspicion. "Hi Anita," came a bright voice. My heart leapt into my mouth. It was Sue, another of our school friends. She obviously had a Saturday job here. Sue was about my height, with bobbed hair, and slightly plump. She liked to hang around with Anita, but always seemed slightly out of the picture socially. "Oh hi Sue," Anita replied enthusiastically. I buried my face even further into the display. "Hi," chimed in Nikki. "I didn't know you worked here." "No," replied Sue, and I could feel her eyes turn towards me. "I only started a couple of weeks ago." "Oh, that's good," said Anita. "Do you like it?" Sue still had her attention on me, but briefly looked away to answer Anita. "Yes, it's good. And I like the money." "Yes," agreed Anita. "Do you get discounts on the stuff in here as well?" "Yes, 20%. "Wow, that's good." "Is she with you?" Sue asked, still looking at me, although I was now looking intently at another blouse. "Oh, yes," Anita responded. "Sarah, this is Sue." I felt the color rise in my cheeks, but knew that I could not keep looking away without looking suspicious. I glanced up as briefly as manners would allow, smiled, and went back to my in-depth analysis of the blouse. "Do I know you?" asked Sue. I panicked, not knowing what to say. "I don't think so," Anita said, coming to my rescue. "Sarah's a friend I met on holiday last year. She lives in Newcastle." "Newcastle?" Sue responded with interest. "I know Newcastle really well. My uncle lives there." I cursed Anita silently for picking that town amongst all others. "Which part do you live in?" Sue asked me. Again, I thought I had to look at her to avoid appearing excessively rude. I'd never been to Newcastle in my life, so I had to think of something. "The center," I replied. "You haven't got much of an accent," Sue observed, unhelpfully. "No, she's not lived there long," Anita chimed in. Sue was riveting me with her stare, with a quizzical look on her face. My terror began to rise up again. I was sure she was going to recognize me. "You look really familiar," she continued. "It's your eyes." At this point Anita began to giggle uncontrollably. I glared at her quickly, but she did not stop. "What's going on?" I asked Sue, obviously realizing that all was not as it seemed. Anita could not reply, and Sue turned her intense stare back to me. Suddenly her expression turned from quizzical to one of realization, and then delight. "I know who you are," she exclaimed. "It's Steve, isn't it? Oh my God, you look brilliant." My heart sank as Sue eyed me with even more interest than before, her eyes darting from my chest to my face and then my legs. I shook my head in denial, but it was no use. I had been found out. "He looks so good." "Did you do it for him, Anita?" Sue went on. "Yes," Anita replied, with a note of pride in her voice. "We're entering him in the Womanless Beauty contest next week. We thought we'd have a dress rehearsal." "I did his makeup," Nikki put in, obviously not wanting to be left out of the glory. "He looks fantastic," Sue went on. "If I didn't know him, I'd never have realized he was a boy." I stood stock still as Sue inspected me minutely. "His boobs look so real," she exclaimed. I blushed still further. "And his legs." I wish my legs were as good as that. Anita and Nikki giggled in response to this. Well, Steve, she declared. I reckon you'd win a regular beauty contest, let alone a womanless one. We told him that too, exclaimed Anita, still laughing. I hung my head in shame. Sue had a huge grin on her face, she was obviously enjoying this immensely. How does it feel to be a girl then, Steve? She asked me. You're so good at it, you must be having fun. I blushed even deeper, and looking up, saw all three girls looking at me with wide grins on their faces. I looked down again, I would hardly call it fun. I mumbled. Oh, I think he's enjoying it, beamed Anita. He must be. Lots of people have told him what nice tits he's got. They all laughed again at this, while I cringed again. Be quiet. I pleaded. I don't want to draw too much attention to myself. There's no one else in the shop at the moment. Well, only Sylvia, and she's out the back. Sue pointed out. Still, it's a fair point, conceded Anita. We did say we'd treat him as a girl while we were out, so no one guessed he was a boy. They continued to stare at me. So is that why you said his name was Sarah? Asked Sue, after a pause. Yes, explained Anita. That and because it's his name for the contest, Sarah Sweetheart.
Aww,
exclaimed Sue. How sweet. I like that, Sarah Sweetheart. She giggled her appreciation at the choice of name. He looks a real sweetheart too. And a Sarah, put in Nikki. The three girls giggled, and then grinned at me. Is that what he's going to wear for the contest then? Asked Sue, looking me up and down again. Not exactly, explained Anita. First off, he's got to wear school uniform. So he'll have more or less what he's got on now, except for a school skirt. Oh, that'll be nice, beamed Sue. And then he's got to wear something formal for the final. Nikki went on. If I get through the first round, I mumbled. Oh, I don't think there's any doubt about that. Sue informed me. Actually, she went on, we hire out some nice formal dresses and things. They're out the back. Do you want to have a look? Oh yes, enthused Anita. Well, I've already sorted him something, interjected Nikki, looking a little hurt at the suggestion. But we might as well see what's on offer. Anita went on. They might have the perfect dress for him. It would be a shame not to at least see what they've got. Nikki shrugged. I suppose so. I'd best tell Sylvia what we're up to, said Sue. No. I exclaimed. Suddenly the whole world seemed to be in on my secret. Well, I'll have to, Sue responded, looking puzzled. We can hardly take up the changing rooms without telling her. But you don't have to tell her I'm a boy. I pleaded. She won't mind, Sue said, she's quite theatrical. She likes that sort of thing. Before I could object any further, Sue rushed back down the shop, and through a curtain that I assumed led to the changing rooms at the back. Oh God, I groaned. What's the matter? Asked Anita. At this rate the whole world will know I'm dressed as a girl. Anita giggled. It's not the whole world, only Sue and the shop owner. If you're going to be trying some of their dresses on, it's only fair. She looked to Nikki for support. I don't suppose they'll have anything suitable, she said. Anita stared at her, looking puzzled. Nikki went on, besides, we can't afford the higher charges. Well, we don't know what they are yet, exclaimed Anita. Anyway, it's just a bit of fun. Nikki shrugged again. She was obviously uncomfortable about something, but I couldn't think what it was. The curtains at the end of the shop opened, and Sue came back through with someone who I assumed must be Sylvia. Sylvia was indeed theatrical looking. She had extremely short hair, almost shaved, and dyed black. She wore a voluminous sort of kaftan top, and black trousers underneath. The most striking thing about her, however, was her height. She was at least 6 feet tall, and towered over Sue as they came down the shop towards us. Her eyes glanced around as she approached us, looking at each of us in turn. "Well," she said eventually. "I suppose that's him. He's the only one wearing a skirt." "That's right," exclaimed Sue, grinning broadly. "Well done." "I wouldn't have known otherwise," the woman I assumed was Sylvia went on. "He's very good indeed." "Thanks," said Anita. Sylvia looked me up and down, concentrating particularly on my legs. "They're good at it at his age," she went on. "Once they get past about 16, it gets much more difficult to get them to look right." She was obviously setting herself up as something of an expert in dressing boys up as girls. I stared back at her, not liking her tone. "He's certainly very pretty," she commented, looking into my face. "Nice delicate features, his makeup sets that off really well." "I did his makeup," Nikki said. Sylvia looked at her critically. "Well, you've done a good job." "Thanks." "Well, young man," she said, addressing me directly for the first time, "I understand you want to try on some of our posh frocks." I stared back at her, but did not answer. "Yes, he does," Anita replied for me. "Well, that's good. I like it when we get boys in here trying things on." She smiled for the first time. "Not that it happens very often, or at least, not as often as I'd like." "I didn't know you were so keen on boys shopping here," Sue said. Sylvia looked at her and said, "Susan, if we could get men and boys wearing our stuff, we'd sell twice as much and I'd be twice as rich." She turned her gaze back to me. "Well, let's see. I'm sure we've got 1 or 2 frocks that might fit the bill. You come out the back with me. Susan, you'd best mind the shop. Let me know if we have any," she paused, "other customers. Particularly if they want to use the changing rooms." "Shall we come in with you to help?" asked Anita. "Yes," I responded. Sylvia paused for a moment, as if to consider. "I don't think that'll be necessary. You have a look around here, and I'll bring him out when he's finished." Anita and Nikki seemed to acquiesce in this, much to my annoyance. "Come along then, let's see if we can make a lady of you," Sylvia said to me. Reluctantly, I walked with her along the length of the shop, and through the curtains at the back. I followed Sylvia to the back of the shop with some reluctance. Her tall form preceded me, and swept the rough brown curtain to one side, and she held it back for me to allow me to pass through. What was revealed looked something like a soccer changing room. It was a small square room, with benches around the walls. There was a further door in the corner, painted blue. Interspaced on the walls were coat hooks, and more noticeably, were 5 or 6 tall mirrors. I jumped as I saw myself in one, to all intents and purposes a rather attractive girl, in a blue jumper and denim mini skirt, with her hair in rather jaunty bunches. "Admiring yourself?" asked Sylvia, smiling at me for the first time. "I don't blame you. You look really good." I tore my eyes away from the mirror and looked at Sylvia. "Well, let's see what we've got to work with," she said, still smiling. "Take your top and skirt off, and those boots, and we'll see if we've got any dresses that will suit you." She folded her arms in front of her, obviously intending to watch me remove my clothes. I hesitated. I had spent the last hour or so wanting so much to take off the skirt, but somehow I didn't want to do it now, not with Sylvia leering at me as she was. "Come on," she urged. I considered my alternatives. I could ask her to leave, but she was unlikely to agree to that. She particularly wanted to look at me to see what dress would suit me best. I could refuse entirely, but having come all the way back here to the changing room with her, that would be odd. Anita wouldn't be best pleased, having arranged this for me. Above all else, whatever I did would delay things. The longer I spent resisting her requests, the longer this torture would go on. So, after a bit of delay, I unfastened the front of my skirt. I should take your boots off first, Sylvia suggested, still standing in front of me with her arms folded. I knew that if I had any difficulties, she was unlikely to help as Anita had. I started to bend down to unzip the boots, but Nikki's constant warning of a knickers came into my mind. It was entirely illogical. Sylvia would see my knickers as soon as I took my skirt off, but somehow I didn't want her to see them with me bending down indecorously. I walked over to the bench and sat down carefully on it, remembering to smooth my skirt as I did so. Sylvia turned to make sure she was still facing me, as I fumbled with the zips, and stepped out of the boots. Anxious as I was about Sylvia's constant gaze, my feet felt relieved to be free. Now the skirt, Sylvia commanded. I looked up at her petulantly. I didn't like being told what to do in this sort of way, but I stood up and unzipped the front of the skirt and pulled it down. "Oh my," gasped Sylvia, looking at me. "You're wearing a slip." I had almost forgotten that, but looked down and saw the shimmering white of the slip and the little pink rosebuds in between the scallops of the hem. I cringed with shame for a moment and then decided to brave it out. "Yes," I replied provocatively. "That's not a problem, is it?" Sylvia looked a bit nonplussed. "No, not a problem. You'll have to take it off for the dress in a minute. I'm just a bit surprised you thought to wear a slip. Most boys wouldn't, not even to dress as a girl." "Well, it helps the skirt hang better," I responded, pretending to know what I was talking about. "Of course it does," Sylvia replied, her eyes still glued to the garment in question. "Don't get me wrong, I wasn't criticizing. I think it's great that you've got one." She seemed a little flustered. "But you want me to take it off?" I asked, wanting to make the most of this. "Well, yes, if you don't mind. It's just that you don't really wear waist slips with dresses." "I don't mind," I said, shrugging, and pulled the slip down as well, stepped out of it, and placed it on the bench. Having done so, I turned to face her again. If she was going to stare at me, I was going to stare back. I was getting tired of passively accepting all that had been happening to me so far that day, and I had decided to take it out on Sylvia. "Knickers as well," she said approvingly. "I like that. I think that if a boy is going to dress as a girl, he ought to have girls' knickers." I stared back at her. "I've got 2 pairs on actually," I pointed out. "I can see that," she responded quickly and breathlessly. "That's," she paused, searching for the word she wanted, "excellent." She stopped again for a moment and then seemed to decide to tell me more. "Most boys think they're too good to wear girls' knickers. I'm pleased to see you're not like that." She stared at me in a curious way. "I used to love dressing up my boyfriends in my stuff, you know. I did it all the time, but it was always a battle to get them to wear knickers, and I don't think I ever got one to wear a slip." I stared back at her. Was she saying that I shouldn't have worn a slip, or maybe that I should have put up more of a battle to not wear knickers? Her eyes were fixed on the flowery pair of knickers I had on over my tights, which made me a little uncomfortable. "Now you'd best take your top off as well," she said eventually, having been lost in some sort of daydream. Please subscribe for the next part. And visit my Patreon page for early access.